Chapter 18 of The American Housewife. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording Mackenzie King. The American Housewife by Anonymous. Chapter 18. 304. Directions for making sweetmeats. A pound of sugar to a pound of fruit is sufficient to preserve most kinds of fruit. Some kinds of fruit require more, and some will do with less than an equal weight of sugar. White sugar makes the most delicate sweetmeats. Nice brown sugar answers well for most kinds of fruit. The West India sugar house syrup is better than sugar to preserve fruit on account of its never fermenting. When brown sugar is used, clarify it as in direction for clarifying syrup, number 303. Then put in the fruit. Nice white sugar does not need clarifying. All kinds of fireproof ware will do to preserve in, excepting ironware. The fruit should not be crowded while preserving and should boil gently. The fruit should be turned out of the preserving kettles as soon as done and set away in a cool place, otherwise they will not be nice. Keep the sweetmeats in stone or china jars that have never been used for other purposes. Glass jars are the best for delicate sweetmeats such as strawberries or cherries. Preserves should be covered tight and kept in a cool place. A paper wet in brandy and laid over the sweetmeats has a tendency to keep them from fermenting. They should be looked to frequently to see that they do not ferment. Whenever they do, the syrup should be turned from them, scalded, and turned back on them while hot. 305. To preserve quince. Quinces, if very ripe, are best preserved in the following manner. Pare and cut them in slices an inch thick. Take out the cores carefully so as to have the slices in the form of a ring. Allow a pound of nice white sugar for each pound of the fruit. Dissolve it in cold water, having a quart of the latter to a pound of sugar. Then put in the sliced quinces and let them soak in it 10 or 12 hours. Put them in a preserving kettle and put it on a moderate fire. Cover them over and let the quinces boil gently. There should be more than enough syrup to cover the quinces. When a broom splinter will go through them easily, take them from the fire and turn them out. In the course of a week, turn the syrup from them and boil it down so that there will be just enough to cover the fruit. Quinces preserved in this manner retain their natural flavor better than when preserved in any other manner. But they must be very ripe to preserve in this way, otherwise they will not be tender. When not very ripe, pare and cut them in either rings or quarters. Take out the cores and boil the quinces in fair water till they begin to grow tender. Take them up and strain the water in which they are boiled. Put in either brown or white sugar, and add a little cold water. When lukewarm, put in the whites of eggs and clarify it. Let it cool, then put in the quinces and boil them slowly for half an hour. Keep them covered over while boiling. If you wish to have them of a light color, turn them out into pots as soon as preserved and set them away in a cool place. Look at them in the course of a week to see if they have fermented. If so, turn the syrup from them, boil it, and turn it back on them while hot. The parings and cores of the quinces can be used for marmalade with a few whole ones. Some people preserve the quinces with the cores in, but the syrup will not look clear. The following is a cheap method of preserving quinces and answers very well for common use. Pare, halve, and take out the cores of the quinces and boil the parings in new cider till soft. Strain the cider, and for 5 pounds of quinces put in a pound of brown sugar, a quart of molasses, the beaten white of an egg. Clarify it, then put in the quinces. There should be rather more than enough cider to cover the quinces, as it wastes a good deal while the quinces are boiling. The peel of an orange, cut in small pieces and boiled with them, give the quinces a fine flavor. 306. Quince marmalade. Wash and quarter the quinces without paring them. Put them on the fire with just enough water to stew them in. When soft, rub them through a sieve, and put to each pound of the strained quinces a pound of brown sugar. Set it on a few coals and let it stew slowly, stirring it constantly. When it has stewed an hour, take a little of it out, let it get cold. If it then cuts smooth, it is sufficiently stewed. 307. Pears. Make a syrup allowing 3/4 of a pound of sugar to each pound of the pears. If brown sugar is used for the syrup, clarify it, then put in the pears and boil them till soft. A few slips of ginger or powdered ginger tied up in bags and boiled with the pears gives them a fine flavor. Choke and vergalose are the best pears for preserving. 308. Pear marmalade. Boil the pears with the skins on. When soft, rub them through a sieve and put to each pound of pulp 3/4 of a pound of brown sugar. Stew it over a slow fire till it becomes a thick jelly. It should be stirred constantly. 309. Peaches. Take juicy peaches, pare them, allow for each pound of them a pound of nice white sugar. Put just enough cold water to the sugar to saturate it. When dissolved, stir it up well, and put in the peaches without crowding them, and boil them slowly about 20 minutes. A few peach meats, blanched and preserved with the peaches, are nice, and are quite ornamental to the peaches. These, as well as all other kinds of sweetmeats, should be turned out of the preserving kettle as soon as taken from the fire, and set away in a cool place. If allowed to remain near the fire, the syrup will not look clear. Cover them up tight, let them remain 3 or 4 days, then turn the syrup from them, scald it, and turn it back while hot onto the peaches. 310. Peach Jam. Inferior peaches and those that are not fully ripe are best preserved in the following manner. Pare and halve them, and take out the stones. Lay the peaches in a deep dish, and to each layer of peaches put a layer of brown sugar. 3/4 of a pound of sugar to a pound of peaches is sufficient. Let the peaches remain until the next day, then put them on a moderate fire without any water, and let them stew slowly about 20 minutes. Peaches preserved in this way are very nice for puffs. 311. To preserve peaches in brandy. Get peaches that are mellow but not dead ripe. Draw a pin round the stem of the peaches so as to pierce the skin. Cover them with French brandy and let them remain a week. Then make a syrup, allowing 3/4 of a pound of a brown sugar to a pound of the peaches. Clarify the syrup, then boil the peaches in it. When tender, take them out of the syrup, let it remain till cool, then mix it with the brandy, and turn the whole on to the peaches. 312. To preserve raspberries. Strain equal quantities of ripe currants and raspberries to make a syrup to preserve the raspberries in. Dissolve white sugar in the syrup by a gentle heat, using a pound of sugar to each pound of syrup and raspberries. When the sugar has dissolved, set the syrup where it will boil about 10 minutes, then put in the raspberries and let them boil 5 minutes. In the course of 4 or 5 days, turn the syrup from the raspberries. Boil it away so that there will be just enough of it to cover the berries. Turn it on them while hot. Keep them in wide-mouthed bottles, corked and sealed up tight. Preserved raspberries are very nice to flavor ice creams and blancmange. 313. Cherries. Get cherries that are not quite dead ripe. Allow for each pound of cherries a pound of white sugar. Make a rich syrup of the sugar. When it boils, put in the cherries with the stems on. Let them boil till transparent. Keep them in glass jars or wide-mouthed bottles, cork and seal them tight. If you wish to preserve them without the stones, take those that are very ripe. Take out the stones carefully, save the juice. Make a syrup of the juice, white sugar, and very little water. Then put in the cherries, and boil them to a thick consistency. 314. Currants. Take the currants when ripe and in their prime. Let them remain on the stalks, picking off the bad ones. Make a syrup of sugar and very little water, allowing a pound of sugar to each pound of currants. Clarify it, then put in the currants and let them boil a few minutes. In the course of a few days, turn the syrup from them, scald it, and turn it back while hot onto the currant. Preserved currants mixed with water is an excellent drink in fevers. Dried currants are also good for the same purpose if made into a tea. 315. To preserve prunes. Pour boiling water on the prunes and set them where they will keep hot, with a lemon cut in small pieces. When swelled out to nearly the original size, put to each pound of the prunes half a pound of brown sugar, a stick of cinnamon, or a teaspoonful of powdered cloves, and if there is not sufficient water remaining to cover the prunes, add more, and stew them in the syrup 1/4 of an hour. Add, when taken from the fire, a wineglass of wine to every 3 pounds of the prunes. 316. Cranberries. For each peck of cranberries, allow 2 pounds and a half of brown sugar and a half pint of molasses. Make a syrup of the molasses, sugar, and a little water. When it boils, put in the cranberries and let them boil till transparent. To make cranberry marmalade, boil the cranberries in just enough water to prevent their burning. Strain them when soft and add to each pound a pound and a half of brown sugar. Stew it over a slow fire, stirring it constantly till it becomes a very thick jelly. 317. Crab apples. Make a syrup allowing the same weight of sugar as apples. Let it get cool, then put in the apples a few at once, so that they will not crowd and break to pieces. Boil them till they begin to break, then take them out of the preserving kettle carefully. Boil the syrup in the course of 3 or 4 days, and turn it while hot onto the apples. This continue to do at intervals of 2 or 3 days till the apples appear to be thoroughly preserved. If you wish to make a marmalade of the apples, boil them in just enough water to keep them from burning. Strain them when soft, and put them to an equal weight of brown sugar. Stew them over a slow fire, stirring them constantly. When of a thick consistency, take a little of it out, and set it where it will get cold. If it then cuts smooth and clear, take the whole from the fire, and turn it into deep dishes. 318. Barberries. Take them when fully ripe. Let them remain on the stems. Make a rich syrup, allowing the same weight of sugar as barberries. When clarified, set it where it will get lukewarm, then put in the barberries. Boil them till the syrup appears to have entered them. Barberries preserved with molasses and a little orange peel and sugar are very good for common use. Allow for each pound of barberries a quarter of a pound of sugar, half a pint of molasses, and the rind of half an orange. Make them into a syrup with a little water. Boil it a quarter of an hour before putting in the barberries. Preserved barberries mixed with cold water make a very refreshing drink in fevers. 319. Tomatoes. Take them when quite small and green. Put them in cold clarified syrup with an orange cut in slices to every 2 pounds of the tomatoes. Simmer them gently on a slow fire 2 or 3 hours. There should be equal weights of sugar and tomatoes, and more than sufficient water to cover the tomatoes used for the syrup. Another method of preserving them, which is very nice, is to allow a couple of fresh lemons to 3 pounds of the tomatoes. Pare thin the rind of the lemons so as to get none of the white part. Squeeze out the juice, mix them with cold water sufficient to cover the tomatoes, and put in a few peach leaves and powdered ginger tied up in bags. Boil the whole together gently for 3/4 of an hour, then take up the tomatoes, strain the liquor, and put it to 1.5 pounds of white sugar for each pound of tomatoes. Put in the tomatoes and boil them gently till the syrup appears to have entered them. In the course of a week, turn the syrup from them, heat it scalding hot, and turn it on to the tomatoes. Tomatoes preserved in this manner appear like West Indian sweetmeats. 320. To preserve apples. Apples for preserving should be tart and mellow. Pare them and take out the cores with a small knife. Allow for each pound 3/4 of a pound of sugar, a teaspoonful of powdered ginger tied in a bag, and sufficient water to cover the apples. Make the syrup, then take it from the fire and put in the apples when it is just lukewarm. Boil them till transparent. Take them up, when part cooled, and put in a little essence of lemon. Turn the syrup from them in the course of a week. Boil it and turn it back on the apples while hot. Cymbeline or mock citron. Cut into small pieces and scrape the rind of cymbeline. Put them into strong salt and water. Let them remain in it 3 days, then in fair water a day, changing the water several times. Soak them in alum water an hour. Tie up oyster shells in a cloth, and boil them with the cymbeline. When the cymbeline are tender, take them up and put them back into the alum water. Make the syrup for them, allowing 1.5 pounds of sugar to 1 of the cymbeline. When clarified, let it get cold, then rinse the cymbeline, and boil them 3/4 of an hour. When partly cooled, put in a little essence of lemon to flavor them. These are good eaten like any other sweetmeats, or used instead of citron for cake. 322. Watermelon rind. Take the rind of a nice ripe watermelon. Cut it into small strips, and boil them till they begin to grow tender, in water with saleratus and peach leaves in it, in the proportion of a teaspoonful of saleratus and a dozen peach leaves to a couple of quarts of water. Take the rinds out of the water and soak them in alum water an hour. Make a syrup, allowing the same weight of sugar as rinds. When clarified and cooled, rinse the rinds and put them in the syrup, together with powdered ginger tied up in a small bag. Boil them till they are quite soft. When partly cooled, add a little essence of lemon. Turn the syrup from them in the course of 2 or 3 days. Take out the bags of ginger, and boil the syrup till there is just sufficient of it to cover the rinds, and turn it on them while hot. 323. Muskmelons. Get muskmelons that are perfectly green and of a quick growth, and as late in the season as possible. If preserved while the weather is very hot, they are apt to ferment. Scrape off the skin of the rind, being careful not to scrape any of the green part. Cut them through the middle and take out the seeds, then cut them in rings, an inch in thickness. Soak them in salt and water a day, then in fair water 3 or 4 hours, changing the water several times. Soak them in alum water an hour, rinse and put them in fair water with a handful of peach leaves to 4 or 5 pounds of the melon, and a tablespoonful of ginger tied up in small pieces of cloth. The peach leaves turn the melon a fine green color. Boil the melons till they begin to grow tender, then put them in alum water together with the ginger. Make a syrup of white sugar and put in the melons and ginger, which should be previously rinsed. Boil them in the syrup as long as you can without the breaking to pieces. In the course of a week, turn the syrup from them, scald it, and turn it on to the melons. Add sufficient essence of lemon to flavor it just before turning it onto the melons. Keep them covered tight in a cool place with a paper wet in brandy on them. 324. Pineapples. Take those that are ripe and perfectly fresh. Pare off the rind and cut the apples in slices an inch thick. Powder the same weight of white sugar as you have pineapples. Lay the pineapples in a deep dish and sprinkle part of the powdered sugar between each layer of apples. Reserve about half of the sugar. Let the apples remain till the succeeding day, then turn the syrup from them and mix it with the reserved sugar and half a pint of water for 3 or 4 pounds of pineapple. Boil the syrup, take it from the fire, and when cool, put in the apples. Simmer them gently till tender. Let them remain in a deep dish for several days. They should be covered up tight and kept in a cool place. Whenever there is an appearance of fermentation, turn the syrup from them, scald it, and turn it back hot onto the pineapples. Keep them in glass or china jars, covered tight, and in a cool place. 325. Pumpkin chips. Take what quantity you choose of a good sweet pumpkin. The butter pumpkin makes the nicest sweetmeats. Have the pumpkin, take out the seeds, and cut it into chips the size of $1. For each pound of the pumpkin to be preserved, allow a pound of fine white sugar and a gill of lemon juice. Put the chips in a deep dish and sprinkle on each layer a layer of the sugar. Turn the lemon juice over the whole. Let it remain a day, then boil the whole together with half a pint of water to 3 pounds of the pumpkin, a tablespoonful of powdered ginger tied up in bags, and the peel of lemons cut into small pieces. When the pumpkin becomes tender, turn the whole into a preserve pot. In the course of a week, turn the syrup from the pumpkin. Boil it to a rich syrup and turn it back hot. 326. Gauges. Allow equal weights of sugar in gauges. Make a syrup of white sugar and just enough water to cover the plums. Boil the plums slowly in the syrup 10 minutes. Turn them into a dish and let them remain 4 or 5 days, then boil them again till the syrup appears to have entered the plums. Put them in a china jar, and in the course of a week turn the syrup from them, scald it, and turn it over them hot. 327. Strawberries. Get cherry or field strawberries and hull them. Take equal quantities of berries and powdered white sugar. Put a layer of each in a preserving pan, having a layer of strawberries at the bottom. Let them remain an hour, then put in a gill of cold water to prevent their burning to the bottom of the pan. Set them on a very moderate fire. When the juice runs freely, increase the fire until they boil briskly. Let them boil half an hour, then turn them into a dish when lukewarm. Put them in wide-mouthed bottles or small glass jars, cork and seal them tight, and keep them in dry sand. 328. Raspberry and blackberry jam. For each pound of berries, allow a pound of sugar. Put a layer of each alternately in a preserving dish. Let them remain half an hour, then boil them slowly, stirring them frequently, to keep them from burning. When they have boiled half an hour, take a little up in a cup and set it in a dish of cold water. If it appears of the consistency of thick jelly, take the whole from the fire. If not, boil it till it becomes so. End of chapter 18. Recording by Kenzie King.